Ow! Oh! Jeez. Oh! Hey, Bigsby, you're not supposed to be up here. Come on, why don't you come down? Come on, be a good boy. Come down. Let's go here. Good boy, good boy.
So does this clear this up a little bit for you? Maybe a little bit? No? Need some more? Well, I got you. Why don't you join me today? So, are you ready to start talking about limiters versus compressors? What, is my voice too quiet? Well, then maybe I need to use my big boy voice. See what I did there? See that range and volume between my whisper and my loud voice? Now that's called dynamics. Now, to understand the differences between limiters and compressors, we need to understand dynamics. And that's simply the differences in volume between the quiet moments of a signal and the louder moments of a signal. Now, both limiters and compressors look to manage those differences, but the way they do it, why they do it, and the end results tend to be quite different. So I'm going to step through that today in the hopes of helping you better understand the differences between limiting and compression. So my goal for this video is to hopefully remove some of the confusion for you. I assume if you're watching this video, this is more of an introduction to you, or this is a continuing introduction as you're looking through a number of different videos on YouTube. I actually went and looked to see what people were saying about this topic, comparing these two different devices. And I'm here to try and fill some gaps and hopefully help bring some understanding to you, because compressors and limiters can look very similar. And there's also so many different types. So, you know, one compressor won't be the same as the next compressor. Now, by the way, I've done a full video on compression, so I don't want to go too deep into compression because that's a topic unto itself. So I highly recommend, if you want some more insight into compressors, including comparing different compressor plugins and which type to use when, check the link in the description if you want to see my video on compression. Now, compressors and limiters often share some parameters, which is what makes it confusing, but because there's so many different types of limiters and compressors, sometimes those features are absent. So that's one reason why it can be a little confusing. So I recommend always starting with the basics. Look for a simple compressor with the basic functionality on it, a simple limiter. Just here, and I'm going to go through some of the examples that I have here. Sometimes a compressor can have a limiting function on it, right? So it can start to get a little confusing. But what I want to draw your attention to first is the meters. Now I've got some visual aids here. By the way, this is not a sponsored review, but I decided to use some of my IK multimedia products here. I've got the M-Box series of, these are like 500 series module plugins, and T-Racks, all kinds of different compressors and limiters, some great products here. If you are interested in these, there's no financial benefit for me, but I will put a link in the description. You can check them out for yourself. So let's take a look at the different meters, because as we use limiters and compressors, we're going to be referencing the meters, and we want to make sure we understand exactly what we're looking at, because different plugins, some of them may be emulating, vintage gear, for example, like old analog equipment would utilize VU meters, like we'll see here on this T-Racks Black 76. This is an 1176 emulation classic compressor. And if we take a look at the meter here, this is a VU meter with 0 just off to the center, on the right of center. If we were referencing our mix on a VU meter, we're looking to reference our peaks to 0 and going maybe +1, +2, but we certainly want the needle going all the way to the right. Now, compare that to the meter that you would see in your DAW, for example. If we look at like a peak level meter, this is a dBFS scale. So 0 would actually be as high as we'd want to go, and that's going to reference limiting, which I will get into a bit later. But 0 on a VU meter equals -12 on the dBFS scale. But you got to familiarize yourself with that so you understand what you're looking at. Don't confuse, like 0 should equal 0 on this meter, because that'll get you into all sorts of trouble. And if your tracks are getting close to 0 even before you start mixing them, well, you may want to look at some gain staging, and I do talk about that in my gain staging video, so make sure to check it out. Link in the description. Now, the other thing to look at, if you take a look at this T-Racks optocompressor, and you'll see this is common, that this meter here, with the 0 all the way to the right, almost looks like a full-scale meter, but in fact, this is gain reduction. Now, often plugins will have a setting to allow you to monitor the input signal, monitor the output signal, or look at gain reduction. Now, gain reduction is something that we definitely want to monitor when we're using a compressor, because we're looking to lower the gain based on some of the other factors here. So this meter here, which with the needle all the way to the right at 0 dB, there's no gain reduction. There's nothing happening. But as we start to increase the gain reduction, adjusting the ratio and the threshold and things like that, we're going to see that needle start to go down to the left. And that's showing us how much gain we're losing by applying that compression effect. Limiters, same thing. And looking at this T-Rax bus compressor, this is based on an SSL bus compressor. That 0 here is all the way on the left side, but as we start to push signal into this and using our different settings to reduce gain, this is like a glue compressor, right? The finishing stage on our master bus. We want to tighten up that mix a little bit. We're going to see the needle start to go up, but that's just showing us how much gain reduction we're applying to the mix at that point. But familiarize yourself with the different meters. Don't confuse yourself by looking at a VU meter and think you're looking at a dBFS meter, or if you're looking at a gain reduction meter, because I know you can get lost if you're looking at the wrong thing. So just take the time to understand the different meters, and that will certainly help you start to understand what exactly you're doing when you start applying compression and using a limiter. So the other feature I want to draw your attention to is the main driver between each function, the compressor and the limiter. There's one setting that basically sets the whole plugin in motion to do its thing, and that's often called a threshold. Now, in a compressor, again, I'm not going too deep into compression, but the other features, the other dials here on the compressor, like attack and release, they just determine how quickly the plugin should work. Attack, how fast it should start; release, how quickly it should let go. But the level of that compressor, the threshold, determines when the compressor starts working. So the purpose of a compressor is to create gain reduction based on the settings that you provide, but it all starts with the threshold. So if we set a threshold at 0 dB, nothing will happen to any of the signals below 0. But once a signal goes over that threshold, then it's going to reduce that gain by the amount you set by the other settings. Its goal is not to keep it under that line. That becomes the reference point. So if it goes, let's say, 2 decibels over the threshold, do we want to bring it down 25%? Do we want to bring it down 50%? That's calculated by the ratio. But the threshold becomes that reference point, and how much will we want to bring it down? Not below the threshold, but in reference to that point. Now, a limiter, by comparison, that threshold is actually the limiter, right? That's as high as we want things to go. Now, not all limiters call that a threshold. It could be called an output ceiling. It could be simply called a ceiling. But as you look in this example here, this is sort of a multi-band limiter, but you can see that term threshold. That's setting the limit, how loud frequencies can go. Think about my little example in the opening there where I kept banging my head on the ceiling. Ow! As I stood up, my head couldn't go any higher, but as I stood up, it compressed my neck and my shoulders closer to that ceiling, but the head couldn't go any further. So with your signal, if you're putting it on a master bus, for example, those peaks are capped at that threshold point or ceiling point, whatever it's called. And then as you increase the gain, all the lower elements come up closer to that ceiling while the top peaks stay there. It can't go over. Both compressors and limiters offer options for creativity, right, by shaping the tonal structure of the sound. But to truly understand the differences between compressors and limiters, we need to examine their core functions. Let's take a look at this waveform from a bass guitar. Notice the dynamics. We have quiet moments and louder moments. In an effort to get this track to sit in our mix, our first instinct is to raise the fader. If something is too loud, we lower the fader. The problem here is we raise the fader to accommodate the quieter moments, but then our louder moments are too loud. So we lower the fader and we start losing the quieter moments. This is a losing battle. This dotted line represents the desired volume we are trying to achieve. We can also call it the threshold. A compressor can minimize the differences between the louder and quieter moments by lowering the volume for any parts that peak above the threshold and allowing us to increase the input volume to bring the quieter moments up closer to the threshold. The goal is not to lose the dynamics, as this could kill the expressiveness of the part, but by bringing the top and bottoms closer to the threshold, we will have a much easier time placing this part in the mix. Different compressors achieve this differently, but the idea is the input gain increases the overall volume, the threshold sets our volume target, and the ratio determines how much the compressor will reduce the volume closer to the threshold. 1-to-1 meaning no reduction, and 2-to-1, 4-to-1, 8-to-1, etc. meaning more and more of a reduction. Other settings like attack, release, and knee relate to how quickly or aggressively the compressor will achieve this reduction, which can often determine whether or not the compressor will add some additional color to your signal. This can be a lot of fun once you are comfortable using a compressor. There are just so many different types of compressors and just so many applications for it all over your projects, whether it's on your tracks, your submasters, your master. You can easily overdo compression, but you definitely have a lot of uses for compressor when used properly. Now, by contrast, a limiter has more specific uses. Now, there are definitely a lot of creative applications for a limiter, but its main function is to tame peaks and to make signals louder. Let's use our dotted line again to demonstrate what a limiter does. We can again call this the threshold, but sometimes it's the ceiling, output ceiling, or simply output. The difference with a limiter is this level is a cap. Sound cannot go louder than this level. So peaks will be pushed up against but not over this level, and lower volumes climb closer to this line. So as we are pushing a limiter, we are compressing the dynamics towards the peaks. Limiters have a key role on a master bus and in mastering. Used strategically, it increases the overall loudness of the mix without compromising the dynamics and quality of the overall mix. A limiter is definitely the key tool when mastering. Well, they'll set that peak point pretty high, just below that 0 point. I'm talking like 0.1, 0.3, and then they'll push the input up just to make that track louder and louder, and that's just how it's achieved. Now, there are other parts of that process in mastering, but that's sort of the core function of making a track louder. Now, there are other applications for limiters on other tracks. I'm pretty selective when I use a limiter. I mean, I'll use it on a snare drum, perhaps a kick drum, just those really snappy percussive tracks where I really want it to pop. But you want to be careful and not overuse a limiter. If you're having trouble getting a track to sit in the mix, loudness often is not your problem. I'll often go to a compressor, EQ, and even automation before I'll even think about using a limiter. It can be a crutch if you're struggling to get a track to fit, but likely there are other reasons why a track is just not fitting in the overall mix. But once you get a grasp of compression and limiting, you'll really start to understand when to use them, and both of them are exceptional tools on your road to creating really great mixes.
Let's go down, just down it. Okay. That's all right. You're not supposed to be up here, why don't you? This is not working out. Should we try that again? Come on, come on. Yeah. You're not a very good actor, are you?
Well, there's my spin on limiting versus compression. I surely hope that's cleared things up for you. If I've missed anything, if you have any questions, that's what the comment section is for. Of course, if you like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. If you want to do a deeper dive with me, I'm on Patreon. I have affiliate links. It all helps the channel, and I really appreciate it. You'll find all the information in the description. Now, the most important thing is to check out another video. I've got one waiting for you right here. And remember, you don't need a band to rock and roll. And I look forward to seeing you again in another video.